wasn't a minute, and I heard two shots, and so I just got everybody out of the church. And we just kept hearing shooting.
It was supposed to be just another Sunday. The kind where your biggest worry is whether you remembered to turn off the coffee pot at home. At St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio, the February cold was finally giving way to something that almost felt like spring. Pastor William B. Schooler had just finished delivering what witnesses would later call one of his most beautiful sermons. The 70-year-old had a voice like warm honey, the kind that made you believe everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. As the last hymn faded into the Sunday afternoon silence, he did what he'd done every Sunday for decades: walked to his office, closed the door, and began preparing for the week ahead. 20 people were still lingering in the sanctuary, chatting about dinner plans, hugging, laughing, living. Then time stopped. 12:30 p.m. exactly. The first shot made everyone freeze. The second made them drop. By the third, they were running. By the fourth, Pastor Schooler was dying. When police arrived, they found something that would haunt this small Ohio community forever. The shooter wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some deranged outsider who'd wandered in off the street. He was family. Daniel Gregory Schooler, 68 years old, the pastor's own brother, stood there with the gun still in his hand. No struggle. No chase. No resistance. Just a man who had just destroyed his family, his church, and his own life in the span of 4 trigger pulls. But the real question isn't what happened that Sunday afternoon. The real question is why a brother would execute his own flesh and blood in the house of God. And the answer, well, that's where this story gets truly dark. If this monster living in the same house, sharing the same blood, fooled an entire family for 15 years, who's sitting at your dinner table right now? Who's in your church pew? Who's sleeping down the hall from your kids tonight? The statistics are terrifying. 1 in 4 homicides are committed by family members. That sweet uncle, that quiet brother, that helpful neighbor, they all have secrets. And some of those secrets are deadly. Don't be the next family that says, "We never saw it coming." Subscribe now and learn to spot the warning signs before it's too late. Because the monster you can't see is the one that will destroy everything you love. Hit that subscribe button like your life depends on it. Because it just might. You want to know what makes a murder truly tragic? It's not just the dying. It's the living that came before it. William Brodus Schooler wasn't just a pastor. He was the kind of man who made you believe in humanity again. Born in 1945 in a Dayton that was still finding its way, William carried something rare in his soul. A light that refused to dim, no matter how dark the world became. Picture this, 1963, a young black man in Ohio, graduating from Dunbar High School with dreams bigger than his circumstances. While other kids were worried about prom dates and summer jobs, William was already thinking about service. About purpose. About how he could matter. Then came Vietnam. Most men who went to that Hell's Cape came back broken. Haunted. Changed in ways that carved permanent shadows across their faces. But William? He came home wearing a bronze star and somehow carrying more compassion than when he left. As if the war had burned away everything in him except the pure gold of his character. The 1970s found him in Dayton's public schools, teaching kids who looked like him, who needed someone to believe in them. He wasn't just marking papers and managing classrooms, he was sculpting futures. Whispering hope into young minds that society had already written off. By 1978, they made him principal. For nearly 20 years, he transformed Jefferson Township schools into something beautiful. Not through grand gestures or headlines, but through the quiet revolution of actually caring. Of seeing potential where others saw problems. When he retired in 1997, William could have disappeared into the comfortable anonymity of golden years. Golf. Gardening. Watching the world from his front porch. Instead, he walked into St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church, the same pulpit his father had once commanded, and gave the rest of his life to God. But here's what made William dangerous to someone. He didn't just preach. He acted. He became interim president of the Dayton School Board. Led the local Baptist Ministers Union. City Commissioner Joey Williams called him almost daily, desperate for his wisdom on reducing youth violence. William Schooler had become the conscience of Dayton. The man everyone turned to when the darkness felt too heavy. Donald Dominic Jr. and Ras Calhoun, men who knew him from the church, would later say that William didn't just inspire them to lead with love. He showed them it was possible. That in a world full of takers, you could still be a giver. That service wasn't weakness, it was strength. For 70 years, William had been the light in other people's darkness. The steady hand. The calm voice. The man who lifted others, healed wounds, and brought hope where there was none. Which makes what happened on February 28, 2016, so much more than just a murder. It was the deliberate extinguishing of light by someone who had shared the same blood, the same childhood, the same last name. Someone who knew exactly what they were destroying. But let me tell you something that will make your blood run cold. The man who would put 4 bullets into William Schooler watched him build his kingdom of kindness for nearly 20 years. Watched him transform from principal to prophet. Watched him become the soul of Dayton. After 1997, when William stepped away from the classroom for the last time, he didn't retire, he ascended. St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church wasn't just another job. It was his inheritance. His father's legacy. The place where the Schooler name meant something sacred. Every Sunday morning, William would walk to that pulpit like a man carrying the weight of every broken heart in Dayton. His voice, soft as a lullaby but strong as steel, would fill that sanctuary with something dangerous, hope. He'd tell stories from the Bible that cut right through the bullshit of everyday life. Stories about forgiving the unforgivable. About loving your enemies. About standing up when the world tries to knock you down. The people of Dayton were drowning. Crime was eating their neighborhoods alive. Jobs were disappearing like smoke. Families were falling apart. But William? He threw them a lifeline every single Sunday. He didn't just preach pretty words and collect offering plates. This man bled for his community. He'd slip kids $20 bills for school supplies when their parents couldn't afford them. He'd sit in City Hall with Commissioner Joey Williams, strategizing how to save children from the streets that were swallowing them whole. Other pastors didn't just respect William, they worshipped him. When he became president of the local Baptist Ministers Union, grown men would sit in rooms and hang on his every word. Churches that had been feuding for decades would come together because William Schooler asked them to. Ronnie Moreland, who knew him for years, said William was deeply involved in the community, but that's like saying the sun is somewhat bright. This man was the community. Derek Atterbury put it simpler. He was about people. He showed love. That word again. The thing that made William Schooler both unstoppable and, as it turned out, completely vulnerable. For nearly 2 decades, William built something beautiful in Dayton. A network of hope. A family of believers. A kingdom where broken people could become whole again. Where children could dream. Where neighbors looked out for each other. He was the teacher who never stopped teaching. The friend who never turned his back. The peacemaker who brought wars to an end with nothing but his voice and his heart. William Schooler had become untouchable. Beloved. Essential. Which is exactly why someone had to destroy him. And the someone who did it? He'd been watching William build his kingdom from the very beginning. Watching him succeed where others failed. Watching him become everything he himself could never be. He'd been waiting. Planning. Seething. For 20 years, the killer had a front row seat to watch William become a saint. And saints, as history teaches us, are made for martyrdom.
We had a gentleman come in, and he went to sit down, doing prayer, and he sat there for a few minutes, and then after prayer, he got up, and he went back in our pastor's office, and then I heard 2 shots. It wasn't a minute, and I heard 2 shots, and so I just got everybody out of the church. And we just kept hearing shooting.
The last time William Schooler would ever walk away from a pulpit, the sanctuary was still warm with the echo of hymns. 20 souls lingered in the afterglow of worship, their hearts full of William's words about forgiveness, about loving your enemies, about turning the other cheek. Helen Schooler sat beside her husband in his small office, heads bowed in quiet prayer. They had no idea that death was walking toward them on carpet-muffled footsteps. Daniel Gregory Schooler, 68 years old, William's little brother, had been sitting in that pew like a time bomb wrapped in Sunday clothes. patient. Watching his older brother bask in the adoration he'd never known himself. For months, maybe years, Daniel had been planning this moment. The moment when he would finally be the one with the power. The one everyone would remember. The one who would make his mark on the schooler legacy. He rose from that pew like a man possessed. Not frantic. Not wild. Determined. This wasn't passion. This was premeditation walking on two legs. Inside that office, William and Helen finished their prayer. Maybe they whispered about the beautiful service. Maybe they talked about next Sunday's sermon. Maybe they just sat in comfortable silence, grateful for another day to serve God together. Then Daniel filled the doorway.
Churches and
Bang.
youth organizations.
The first shot
He was the
shattered
kind of
more than
person
silence.
people turned to,
It shattered
not just
everything
for
William
guidance,
had built.
but for grace.
20 years
And
of
yet,
love,
for all the
leadership,
lives
and
he
light,
touched,
gone
no
in the
one
time it
could have
takes to
imagined
squeeze a trigger.
Pow, pow, pow. And that's when everybody started running.
The second shot sent Alberta Blythe into survival mode. I just got everybody out of the church, she'd later remember, her voice still shaking. We kept hearing shooting and shooting. Bang. Curtis Booker, the choir director, thought William had stumbled. His mind refused to process what was really happening. Then I heard a second pop. And I was like, that sounds like gunshots. Bang. 4 bullets. 4 pieces of William's soul scattered across that small office. 4 thunderclaps that turned a sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. The congregation didn't just run. They fled like their lives depended on it. Because they did. Diving behind chairs, crawling under benches, screaming, run, run, as they stampeded toward exits that couldn't open fast enough. Nobody knew if Daniel was done. Nobody knew if they were next. In that moment, the man they'd known as William's quiet little brother had become their worst nightmare. But here's the part that will haunt you forever. When the sirens finally arrived, Daniel didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't try to escape or make excuses. He just stood there, next to his brother's body, gun still in hand, waiting, like a man who had finally completed his life's work. The paramedics fought for William's life with everything they had. But you can't resurrect a saint. You can't undo 4 bullets fired by someone who knew exactly where to aim for maximum damage. Pastor William B. Schooler, teacher, leader, peacemaker, saint, was gone. And the man who killed him? He was family. Blood. The little brother who had watched William shine for 7 decades and finally decided to blow out the light. The church that had been full of songs and prayers was now full of sirens and screams and the kind of silence that comes after everything good in the world has been murdered. But the real question isn't how Daniel did it. The real question is why. When the sun set on February 28, 2016, Dayton didn't just lose a pastor. It lost its innocence. Because the monster who destroyed William Schooler wasn't some stranger from the shadows. It was the man who had shared his childhood, his DNA, his last name. Daniel Gregory Schooler stood in that blood-soaked office like a statue. Gun still warm in his hand. No tears. No regret. No human emotion whatsoever. When the police arrived, he didn't run, didn't fight, didn't even speak. He just surrendered. Like a man who had finally completed a task he'd been planning for years. But here's where this story gets really dark. Everyone saw this coming. Daniel's niece, Joyce Napier, would later reveal the family's worst-kept secret. Daniel had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. 2 mental illnesses that, left untreated, could turn a man into a walking time bomb. And Daniel? He'd been ticking for decades. The court records read like a horror movie script. 2001. Daniel points a gun at someone and gets arrested for felonious assault. He pleads insanity first, then changes to guilty when reality hits. The court notes he may be mentally ill and in need of treatment. Translation: everyone knew he was dangerous, but nobody did anything about it. 2002. He attacks a woman, leaving her traumatized and wounded. 2 years in prison. Did that fix him? Hell no. 2007. Daniel beats a friend with a golf club for absolutely no reason. The victim said Daniel has mental problems, but then dropped the case. Because that's what people do, they enable monsters until it's too late. 2008. Daniel throws a hammer at 2 men while wielding a knife. Police note he becomes violent without his medication. But somehow, he's still walking free. Pattern recognition, anyone? For 15 years, Daniel Schooler was a one-man crime wave. Attack after attack. Weapon after weapon. Court appearance after court appearance. And every single time, the system failed. His family failed. Society failed. But most importantly, Daniel failed his brother. When Daniel finally sat in that courtroom, flanked by lawyers who would claim self-defense, he looked like a man who had found peace. His hands rested calmly on the wooden table. His face was empty, almost serene. The room was suffocating with tension, but Daniel? He was the calmest person there. Self-defense. That's what his lawyers claimed. They said Daniel feared for his life when he walked into William's office. They painted a picture of a scared, mentally ill man who had no choice but to shoot his brother 4 times. But the prosecutors told a different story. They said William was sitting peacefully behind his desk when Daniel pulled out his gun. They said there were 4 bullets and 0 signs of struggle. They called it what it was, premeditated murder. The jury didn't need long to see through the bullshit. They heard about Daniel's decades of violence. They saw the parade of victims he'd left in his wake. They looked at the crime scene photos of St. Peter's Church, the sanctuary that had been turned into a slaughterhouse. 1 hour and 7 minutes. That's how long it took them to decide Daniel's fate. Guilty. Guilty of murder. Guilty of assault. Guilty of carrying a weapon he should never have been allowed to touch. But here's the real tragedy. 2 brothers died that day. William's body went into the ground. Daniel's soul went into a cage. And the question that haunts Dayton to this day isn't whether Daniel was mentally ill. The question is, how many red flags does a family have to ignore before they become accessories to murder? Because everyone knew Daniel was dangerous. Everyone knew he was unstable. Everyone knew he had access to weapons. But nobody, not his family, not the courts, not the mental health system, nobody stopped him from walking into that church with murder in his heart. William Schooler died because the people who should have protected him chose to look the other way. He died because mental illness became an excuse instead of a reason to get help. He died because sometimes the monster isn't a stranger. Sometimes the monster is your baby brother.
I got a call from my daughter. That part is very hard.
Today, Sister McGraw, I'm proud of you getting yourself together and, continue.
As a member of the Black community that has learned from men like Dr. Schooler, we will continue to not be deterred from the greater cause, and that is the charge and cause to continue to work collectively to improve the conditions like gun violence. In Dayton, the solution lies collectively in our ability and our concern with addressing these issues. And so it is not just one solution, but it takes time. We have to build legislation. We have to do it through government. We have to do it neighborhood by neighborhood.